My name is Susie Smith and I am a breathwork therapist. I went along to a breathwork session and 2.5 hours later, and a lot of tears and a lot of crying and a lot of shaking, I came out and I was just like, whoa. First thing I would say to people is don't do it online by yourself, because that can actually be quite dangerous. There's a very big difference between functional breathwork and pranayama and conscious connected breathwork.
That's the load of woo-woo rubbish that's not going to work.
I've seen it help people with addiction. I've definitely seen it help people with anxiety.
Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got Susie with us. Susie, you should quickly want to introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Susie Smith and I am a breathwork therapist. I'm a trauma-informed facilitator. I work with people's emotional baggage. I work with people's emotional trauma. I'm also an energy intuitive, a shaman, and all the other magical things that we can pluck out there. I'm them as well.
I'm so looking forward to getting involved with it. So I always ask my guests to tell us a bit more about what they do and how they ended up doing what they do today. So could you walk us through your story a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been on a healing journey since about 2013, really going deep into what was causing me to repeat many patterns and habits and behaviors that were keeping me stuck. And I was kind of making quite good progress. And unfortunately, my son got diagnosed with a condition, and he will always now be on medication. He's absolutely fine. But when we found out, it was obviously quite scary. And all of my old traumas that I thought I'd dealt with started to come to the surface. And I knew I needed to deal with it. And I couldn't for the life of me work out which way I needed to go. I'd done the talking stuff. It wasn't really working for me. I'd done energy healing. It's not going to cut the mustard when there's big trauma happening. So somebody said to me, have you tried breath work? Have you tried working with your nervous system? I'd never really heard of anything like that before. So I was like, listen, I'll give it a shot, because I needed to show up for my son. I needed to be there fully grounded, on point, and all my stuff needed to just be dealt with so that I could do that. And I went along to a breathwork session and 2.5 hours later, and a lot of tears and a lot of crying and a lot of shaking, I came out and I was just like, whoa. What the fuck just happened there? And that was it. I was hooked. I realized how much I'd let go of in one session, how much more grounded I felt, how many emotions and old energy I'd let go of. And that was it. I was like, I need to know how to do this. And that was where it started. That was in 2016.
Wow. So what is breathwork? I've done a little bit of research into it and I know a bit about it, but a lot of people don't even know what it is. So what is it?
Yeah, and you know what? It still surprises me that people haven't heard of it, because obviously I've been doing this since 2016, and everyone that I know is all into breath work, and it's still quite surprising how many people don't know about it. And when you say breath work, the first thing people think about is yoga, because that's the ancient way of doing breath work. It's the ancient tradition of breath work, but there are so many different ways of doing breath work. So pranayama, yogic breathing, is the big one that everybody knows. But that's very kind of meditative. That's more about calming the mind. It's kind of works with this part of the body, the head. Yeah, it's meditation, all that sort of stuff. Then you've got another one called functional breath work. Now, functional breath work is the more scientific. It's what the experts discovered and designed to help increase the capacity of athletes. So endurance based, yeah. So they do, like, have you heard of the people that run marathons? They do altitude training. Yeah. So there's a way that you can actually get yourself into altitude training without going to altitude through the breath. Very clever, very powerful. So that's more based around the scientific element. There's also things that have been kind of tick boxed by science to say that they work. That comes under functional breath work. And then you've got the one that I do, the one that I teach, the one that I work with, which is called conscious connected breathwork, circular breathing. And it's known as the self-healing modality. It's the big one. It's the one that brings on the tears and it releases the trauma, and it works with the nervous system. The others work with the nervous system, but conscious connected breathwork is really a self-healing modality. It's a therapy. It's known as therapy without talking.
So what would be a starting point of that kind of breath work? Like what do you start with when someone wants to explore that?
The first thing I would say to people is don't do it online by yourself because that can actually be quite dangerous. There's a very big difference between functional breath work and pranayama and conscious connected breath work. Pranayama and functional breath work are probably a little bit safer as long as the teacher knows what they're doing online. It's not so much working with the body per se. It is changing states, absolutely, but it in the remit of it being a little bit safer, that's fine. Conscious connected breathwork, I would say to people, if you're going to try it for the first time, go and see a practitioner and make sure, caveat, that they are trained correctly. There's a lot of people out there saying, I can do breath work because they think it's just a bit of breathing, but it's deep work. And if the person that's doing it doesn't know what they're doing, it can be quite a difficult experience. So find a practitioner that you can go and see in person. Most practitioners, like myself, that are qualified will be listed on the UK Breath Association, and that then you know that they're qualified and they're respected and they're trusted. But also, most people will do introductory workshops. So I do introductory workshops where you go through all of the basics, all of the neuroscience, because there's a lot of neuroscience involved with this breath work that you need to be aware of. And that way you've got all that you need, you're fully supported. Everybody in that group will be new. And then you can start your quest from there. Then you can maybe decide to do some one-to-ones, or you might want to go straight into a one-to-one. It's totally up to you. But I always say, make sure that you're facilitated when you do it for the first 2 or 3 times.
Is there not an ideal candidate, but is there, particularly when it comes to trauma, is there a area that you've seen more success with a specific type of trauma, or is it more just generally?
I would say, excuse me, I need to cough. Apologize. I would say I've seen it help people with addiction. I've definitely seen it help people with anxiety, which can be a coping mechanism. We've all got different coping mechanisms. We've all got habits and behaviors where we kind of do these things, but we don't really want to do them, but we don't know how to stop them. They're automatic behaviors, maladaptive behaviors that the nervous system has created to keep us safe. Excuse me. And I've noticed that people that struggle to change those habits and behaviors once they've done this kind of breath work, because the roots of why we do that sit in the body. And conscious connected breath work works with the body. It works with the 80% of information that is stored in the system that sends the messages to the brain and then tells us what to do. So if you work with this part, this message to the brain starts to change. And what I notice with people is it can be quite subtle. And people will come and do sessions. I've got people that have been with me now for 4 years plus. They might only come once a month, but they keep coming because they know it's a practice. And what will happen is one day you just won't do that thing that you've always done, or you won't be triggered the way you've always been triggered. All of a sudden you notice, oh, I'm not reaching for that packet of crisps. Oh, I'm not reaching for my cigarettes. Oh, I don't need a drink. Oh, I'm not angry because, my girlfriend got home late, or whatever minor inconvenience it might be. It's just not there anymore because we've dealt with the underlying cause, because it's never really about that. It's always about something prior to that. So that's the biggest difference, I think.
And what about, because I was going to pull on a thread that you mentioned there of something that a lot of people face in today's busy society, and that is a lot of us struggle with our mental health and particularly anxiety. What advice can you give from your world of ways that people can start sort of bringing breath work in, and also ways of dealing with it that are sort of just a good starting point?
Yeah. I think breath awareness, all right, that's not something that you hear every day. We think about what we eat. We go to the dentist. We think about face creams. We go exercising. We do all of these amazing things. None of those are going to matter if you're breathing dysfunctionally. If your breath is not right, it doesn't matter what you do, you're still going to have some kind of issue going on beneath the surface that might not surface all the time, but it will keep coming back no matter what you're doing. Oh, I'm doing that thing again. I'm still anxious. I'm da 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 da. Because what happens with our breath is it will start to sort of change the way we breathe to protect us. And what I mean by that is the nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. So breath is part of the autonomic nervous system. And it's the only part of the autonomic nervous system that you can manipulate and change. So everything else just happens automatically. Digestion, sweating, all of that sort of stuff, circulation, we can't change that. The breath is automatic, but it has a point where you can override it to actually change the state of the nervous system. A lot of people that are in anxiety or are in that kind of nervous state or that constant kind of fidgety energy that they can't quite settle, it's usually a dysfunctional breath pattern that's got them stuck in their sympathetic nervous system, their fight or flight response,
Yeah.
which we need the fight or flight response. Okay, it's if you're trying to catch a train or you need to quickly catch something from falling off the side, you've got to have a quick reflex. So the sympathetic kicks in, we get that cortisol going, but that action allows that energy to move through the body. When we breathe incorrectly, and a lot of people in the Western world, unfortunately, breathe in their chest, and most people go, well, that's where the lungs are. Correct. But we need to use the diaphragm, which is the primary breathing muscle. And a lot of people don't do that. They don't breathe into their belly. So one of the first things people should recognize, I always say to people, if you put a hand on your chest and a hand on your belly, close your eyes and take a few really deep breaths. Notice which hand is moving more. If the hand on the chest is moving more, you're a chest breather. You're more likely to be anxious. You're more likely to have sleep issues. You're also probably a bit of a people pleaser, find it hard to say no. And there's a lot of emotional content that sits beneath that. So I always say to people, practice breathing into your belly. The simplest piece of information, practice breathing into your belly. But then you'll have people that say, oh, well, I've got breath in my belly, but I've got nothing in my chest. That's probably slightly better in terms of the anxiety. It's more unusual for somebody to have anxiety when they're a belly breather, but they've still shut this part down, which we need to use because we've got the primary breathing muscle, the diaphragm, secondary breathing muscles, the intercostal muscles at the side, and the third breathing muscles in the chest. They all need to work together. So if you're only using one or the other, then everything's a little bit out of shape. And people that don't breathe in their chest usually have really bad issues with their neck and their shoulders and possibly their hips. And they're emotionally shut down, closed up. I'm not letting anyone in. So you've got to open all that up and allow the breath to open. And it's usually when we do that, what we're doing is we're healing a breathing pattern that for some reason had to shut down.
The thing that I was really interested about that is it was like you were talking to me because I was sitting there thinking, hang on, I think I am a chest breather, but then it was more when you started mentioning the whole being anxious and being a bit of a people pleaser. I was like, okay, that's definitely my nature. How do you where was the link drawn there? Obviously it's through the work that you've done, the education you've done. Where has that link come from? Because I don't think many people would have thought that there would have been that sort of that link between that human characteristic and your breathing pattern.
Yeah, so I work with a modality. I also train people, so I run my own training. And I work with something called body mapping. So every part of your body holds an emotion. And when I'm working with people, I give them what I call a breath analysis. I need to have them in person, but I can read people's personalities by the way they breathe. And when I say that, everyone goes, and I mean, I'm good, but I'm not that good. But when I get people into a one-to-one, I can see the way your breath is holding itself. So as I said to you earlier about the breath shutting down, and we end up with a dysfunctional breath pattern, people that breathe in their chest, at some point, for them to feel safe in life, they had to kind of make sure they did what people wanted them to do. And what happens is they become less and less grounded. So the breath comes further up, because all of the energy ends up here. They're usually overthinkers as well. So there's a lot of energy happening here.
Yeah. Guilty.
And so when I'm reading your breathing pattern, I can see where the breath has closed down, and that will then determine to me what is probably sitting underneath that on an emotional content. I can see what's happening with your shoulders, whether your shoulders are tight. If your shoulders are tight, there's a lot of repressed anger there. So I look at people's bodies as they breathe, and I can see what's happening in the emotional body as well as the energetic body. Because for me, in my work, and I'm mental health trained as well, I'm a mental health first aider, I truly believe that emotional health is mental health, because the vagus nerve that sits in the body that is responsible for all of the things that we do, it basically carries information up through the vagus nerve into the brain along something called an affect pathway. And that affect pathway is our emotional content, and it's telling the brain and the mind how we want to behave. The amygdala and the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus are following the lead from that message that comes up the vagus nerve. Now, if that's faulty and that's been traumatized, and it's almost like if you imagine a scratched record, it's just going to keep playing the same thing over and over because something has happened to you in your past, and it can be from birth, it could be childhood, teenage, it doesn't matter, it could be last week, it doesn't matter when it was. But if you haven't processed it, if you never were given the tools to process it, and it doesn't mean our parents or caregivers did anything wrong, they were just doing the best that they could, then what happens is it stays in the body and it gets stuck in these little pockets in the nervous system. And the vagus nerve remembers that and goes, all right, so anytime we feel like that, this is what we do. And it gets stuck on a loop. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's why people pleasers find it really hard to say no, because they think, oh my God, they're going to hate me. I feel really bad. I best say yes. I'm just going to say yes.
Yeah.
Because the nervous system and the history within your body will always choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. So even if something is good for you, if your body and your nervous system is not used to it, it won't do it. It will do what it knows, even if it's not good for you.
Yeah, I suppose it's that fear of the unknown, because even I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, you're naturally going to lean towards something you already know what's going to happen because it's predictable and reliable.
And that fear state, that going to the edge of fear, if you have a lot of emotional baggage and you have a lot of emotional trauma in your body, fear is there to show us where we need to grow. But what fear does for most people, because they don't know how to work with it or they don't understand what's happened, is they revert back to the old way of doing it because it feels comfortable.
Yeah.
But comfortable isn't always the right thing for us to do.
What obviously we mentioned earlier that in today's society in the Western world, we live in a very high pressure, high stress environment for a lot of us. What would you like to see the Western world do more of? Because it's something that I often talk about on this podcast of going like, we just all of like, particularly I live just outside London, and I always can say, if you go to London and the south, we've always got somewhere to be. We don't care what anyone else is doing. You go up north, everyone's got more time for you. But I just find it interesting that we're all in this like perpetually busy state where none of us have got any time for anyone. What would you like to see the Western world change?
I think we need to bring nervous system awareness into schools because, when you teach people about the nervous system and their emotional health, things change because, it's about recognition of, you're not your past, you're not your trauma, you're just a series of habits and behaviors. But those habits and behaviors can change. Just people sometimes say, well, this is just the way I am. I've got to be busy. I've got to be, we go back to that word coping mechanism. We've been conditioned to believe that we have to be in this sympathetic nervous system state. It's the way that the world has been conditioned. We eat on the go. We're constantly working. We're hunched over desks. All of our respiratory system is struggling to cope. So the whole body itself will start to struggle to cope, which then affects the mental health. Everything is connected. But I think if we taught this stuff in schools and people became more aware of what is actually happening in their nervous system and their emotional body, looking at it and observing it objectively allows the mind to just soften a little bit because you stop the spiral.
I think it's out, like you mentioned earlier, because my thought process is always whenever I'm stressed or in that scenario is very much, you can't stay there. Because if it's like one of the pieces of advice that I got given once is, if you're constantly at 110, when you need that bit extra, you got nowhere to go. You're already at the ceiling.
Yeah.
So if you give 80 most of the time, you've always got that little bit extra to give.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting thing because I don't think people realize the damage staying in that state does. And I say that, and I'm 100% there, completely a hypocrite. I will admit it. But I always think it and go, it can't be healthy to stay here because it's just it's not productive because you
Yeah.
never feel like you can actually breathe.
And that's exactly what's happening. So, what you're talking about is something that we all have. So, from a trauma informed perspective, we all have something called a window of tolerance. Yeah, our nervous system is built to have a window of tolerance. And it's exactly that. It's what your nervous system can tolerate because you need to fluctuate. You don't want to be completely okay, normal all the time because that's equally as unhealthy. You've got to feel these things. Life is here to be felt. But it's about understanding that you can ride those waves in a healthy way and your nervous system, your mind, your body can still tolerate it. What happens in society these days is we put ourselves under so much pressure and we're not breathing properly, we're not eating properly, we're not doing all the things that would actually help the system. And that window gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So what you're talking about that 110% is that's your 100% there. So the minute you're triggered, poof, you're out your window. So if you imagine that's your window and then that's your nervous system, I'm triggered, you're out your window.
Yeah.
All hell breaks loose. When you practice something like breath work, when you practice something that helps to build vagal tone, anything that works with your vagus nerve. So again, because I work with the nervous system, there's a myriad of different things people can do. Breath work is the main one. There's lots of different things you can do. But as you start to work with your nervous system and your vagus nerve, you build what we call resilience. You build what we call vagal strength, vagal tone. And that allows your window to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So then you're triggered, you're still in your window. It's like, all right, this
Yeah.
is not great, but I can deal with this. This is what I
Yeah.
need to do. Does that make sense?
No,
Um,
completely. It's what I always say. It's obviously not as well informed as your, but it's what I always say. I say to people that always say, "Oh, but like, it's that argument of, oh, what are you stressed about? Or like,
Mm,
you've got no reason to be stressed." And what I always say is, stress is relative to tolerance.
yeah,
So you can only deal with what you've been exposed to before.
yeah,
If someone exposed, it's like the other analogy I use is if you're lifting a 10 kilo weight and you're managing that, and I give you a 12 kilo weight,
mm,
yes, you're going to be able to lift that. But if I suddenly go, right, here's 100 kilos, you're not going to be able to cope.
yeah.
And it's interesting how that actually links into what you're saying of you almost need to stay in the green so you've got the space to go.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Staying in the green. And that's something I teach. I teach a traffic light system and I call it calling in the green. And that calling in the green is bringing in your parasympathetic nervous system. It's the rest and digest, which we don't have enough of. And the way the nervous system works to allow that window to expand, you have to increase your tolerance and you have to work with the vagus nerve and the nervous system. So if you've got all of this past trauma and all of this stuff from your past that you've never dealt with, that's going to make your window smaller. So when you do things like conscious connected breath work, these things, they start to leave. They start to what we say integrate. So you might have a session and you might cry, you might shake. All of that is the body letting go of something it no longer needs. And then you've integrated it. It doesn't have any hold over you. So that's like, oh, we've got more room in the pot and the vagus nerve can expand. And the thing with the vagus nerve is it's like a muscle, even though it's a nerve, is that you can be born with a low vagus nerve because you inherit from your parents what they've got, but you can strengthen it like a muscle. You can work on it to build it and change it. So anyone can build resilience. Anyone. It's just
That's really
learning
interesting.
how.
I would never have thought that like that's a scenario where you can be born with it. Because obviously, in my uninformed thought process is very much like, oh, we're all born with this nervous system, and they're all kind of relatively the same. So it's interesting that that has your parental experience of like what
Yep.
your parents experience has an impact on how that then transpires in you.
Yeah. And if your mother had a tough time while she was pregnant, she would have been stressed. So her vagus nerve would have been compromised, which means that's probably you'd be born in with that. So your vagus nerve wouldn't be that strong. But it doesn't mean it has to stay that way. That's the thing about the nervous system. It's adaptable. It's created to be flexible. And what happens, unfortunately, is people don't know this and they end up getting stuck in a particular state and they think, well, this is just the way I am. But it's not the way you are. You can
It's so
change.
hard as well, particularly like we've spoken a lot about anxiety, and I know
Mm,
myself included dealt with anxiety a lot. But then also there are just people that are in this constant anxious state.
Yeah.
But then I'd say, I think it does, funny enough, I'm even talking about myself here, is it comes with that people pleaser thing because we want to take on so much stuff because we're like, oh no, I need to, like, if I don't say yes to this, they're not, like you say, not,
Yep.
they're not going to like me, this is going to
Yep.
happen, or I'm not going to prove myself, or
Hmm.
someone else is going to, like, someone else is able to cope with this, I'm not. It's so ingrained in all of
Mm.
us.
Yeah. But the power in actually saying, no, I choose me in this
Yeah.
moment. I need to resource myself right now. I can't do that. Sorry. And normally what happens with people and what they don't realize, again, from an energy perspective, working because I work with people in energy, is that we don't allow the stuff to come to us that is waiting to come to us because we've got so much noise going on and we're blocking it with so much stuff that's not important, that when we actually say no and make some space, other opportunities come in, other people come in, other things come in, and our boundaries become better. And we actually become better people. We become calmer. I mean, you've got to go through the transition. That's the hard bit. And you can't, it's not the sort of thing you can just go, okay, well, I'm just not going to say yes anymore because it's in your nervous system and you need help to work with that so that you can move through that. You know, it's they're not always easy experiences, but on the other side of that is what I call, you know, strong emotional health, good resilience, and better mental health.
Do you wish more organisations? I'm thinking those that employ people. I mean, I talk about work because it's probably one of the more stressful environments that people find themselves in. Do you see businesses wanting more support from people like yourself of trying to be that more aware of what's going on and how they can support their teams? Because one of the things I always think is that idea of being overloaded often comes from work or parenting. It
Yeah.
normally comes from those two boxes, and then yeah, it's become this. Like I said, with Western culture, it's very much always more, more, more. So, have you seen an increase in people coming to you going, "I'd like you to come and help some of my
Yeah, I do a lot of
employees"?
corporate work. I do a lot of corporate work. I do something called nervous system in the workplace or neuroscience in the workplace because I say to people, my work is 70% neuroscience, 30% woo woo. So it's a good mix.
I love that.
And interestingly, the point that you made about work and parenting being the crux of the stress, if your nervous system is regulated and you don't have a lot of past baggage sitting there causing all of these triggers, they're actually not going to cause you too many problems. So it comes back again to the external not being responsible for the internal. The internal world has to be balanced and regulated because then the external world becomes easier. So there's nothing the external world can do to you that you can't change, fix, remedy, work with, adapt to if you have the resilience in the body to do so. You know, so if you're a people pleaser and you haven't been able to sort of work through whatever it is that's creating that, then yes, you're going to say yes to more things. So then life will be difficult.
Yeah.
But if you come back into the body, work with your trauma, understand why your nervous system has to keep doing that, break that cycle and learn to say no, these things don't become quite as stressful.
That's really interesting. And I wanted to ask as well, with your work in the corporate space, is there specific industries that you see a lot of them coming to you? Because on my gut instinct, again, uninformed, goes,
Mm,
I'd love to see people like yourself go into big finance firms and
mm.
those really like those what's the word, stereotypical high
Yeah.
stress environments where it's essentially we don't care, we
Hmm.
want just as much out of you as we physically can get. Have you seen that, what in terms of what organizations are asking for your support? Obviously you don't have to give
Yeah.
names, but more sort of what industries are they?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's been a wide range. I've had media, I've had I haven't had any financials actually, to be honest. I've had um, some big shops come to me. I've had some media people come to me. I've done a couple of newspapers. I mean, I've done quite big companies, and it's been really interesting to see the different way in which they're approaching it. I think one industry that I feel really is the last to connect to this kind of wellness because a lot of the big companies now are really into this. They have wellness budgets and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's creeping in. But one industry and the industry that I was in prior to doing all of this that I worked in for nearly 15 years, and that's hospitality. They
Yeah.
work long hours. They have stimulation going on 24/7, noise, bars, music, fights. They eat
Yep.
unhealthy food, most likely because they're eating at work and it's late hours, disrupted sleep. They need it, I think, more than anyone. I've worked with a few pub companies actually because of my background. And I think that's an area where they give a lot of pleasure to a lot of people, and they're wrung out most of the time. So I think I would say hospitality needs it. Financial industries, yes, but they're normally the ones with the big bucks. The unfortunate thing with the hospitality industry is they don't have much spare cash. So their staff are the ones that suffer. The financial companies, they've normally got quite healthy budgets. I know some other friends of mine that have done some work there. So, I think any industry where people's sleep is disrupted is a big one.
Yeah, I suppose anyone that's doing night work and things like that is going to have a big impact. Because I mean, there's even evidence to show that if you work nights, you've got a higher likelihood of things like cancer.
Yeah.
There is evidence to show that, and I think you're completely right. Of normally you're in a higher stress environment. Because I suppose if you cast yourself back to sort of not what's the point, not prehistoric, but what we used to do,
Yeah.
but it's all down to we
Mm.
we did stuff during the day and we didn't do
Yeah.
anything in the evenings,
Yeah.
whereas modern life has kind of flipped that on its head.
24/7. Yeah. Yeah.
It,
It's 24/7.
how do you start those conversations with organizations? Because I think, Brett, like I said, it's interesting that so many people aren't aware of things like
Mm.
breath work, and because I think oftentimes we have that topic of mental health, which links in with it,
Yeah.
but breathwork is often a more newer topic to discuss. How do you
Mm.
open those conversations? Because I assume that you're going to get some people that go, that's the load of woo woo rubbish that's not going to
Yeah.
work.
I always hear that, and then they do it and go, "Oh my God." But then, the thing is, I was also on a television program, which was really good because people could, and they'd never done it before. So when they did it, you actually got the real experience, which was great because they all had amazing experiences. But I think with the inroad to kind of going into these places, I kind of I have a brochure that I send, which I start with neuroscience rather than breath work. The breath work that I teach in my workshops and in one-to-ones is sometimes a little bit too much for a corporate environment because you don't want to be sitting there crying and snot coming out your nose in front of your boss. You don't want to be
Yeah,
doing that. And I
yeah,
don't want people to feel like they can't let it go because that's just as dangerous.
yeah,
So I work more with the nervous system. I work with something called the polyvagal theory, and it teaches people to understand how to not respond when they're in a certain reactive state. And so, we all get triggered, and
yeah.
it's teaching people how to work with their triggers and also how to work with their nervous system so that the environment that they're in, everyone's just a lot happier, and everyone knows and understands where someone might be at. And it's okay to have your boundaries, and there's certain ways I get people to work with recognizing other people's nervous systems. So if you're dealing with somebody and you can see that they're hyper anxious, you need to get them to breathe.
Yeah.
You need to get them to come into what we call the green space, so get their nervous system regulated and then have the exchange. It's going to be more productive. People are going to want to come to work. It's going to be more streamlined.
Yeah.
It just makes
You're
sense.
singing every word that I always bang on about, which I never understand this whole culture that often organizations have of like not understanding that
Mm.
work isn't be all and end all, and people have lives outside work and shit happens in your life that you're like, that's not what I wanted to happen today.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's about having that level of compassion, and I still
Yeah.
don't understand why we struggle with it so much. I say my gut instinct whenever I meet someone and I can tell they're in a situation which they're not happy is not, why haven't you done this for me? It's, what's going on? Like,
Yeah.
how can I help?
Yeah.
Because not as you say, particularly when we talk about work scenario, no one wants to
Mm.
go to work feeling like shit.
Yeah. And the thing is, people will use a myriad of different reasons not to go in. If no one says, I've got mental health issues, I'm not coming in. It'll be a migraine, the kids are sick, the dog's been run over, whatever. They'll always make an excuse. It's never really what's going on.
Mm.
And I always say to people as well, when you're working with people and you're there with each other 24/7, whether or not you're close, you know each other because you're
Yeah,
spending probably more time with them than your own family half the time.
yeah,
And I always say to people, if someone isn't right, just ask them how they are. And if somebody then does the obvious, very British thing, I'm fine, ask them again.
You
Ask them
sure?
again. Yeah. You are, but say, how are you?
Yeah,
Again, really sincere, really with compassion, to give them almost permission to tell you, because people are embarrassed. People feel like they shouldn't be complaining and they shouldn't be moaning. And, there's this kind of blanket rule that I don't know who made it up or where it came from, is that you shouldn't talk about how you feel,
yeah,
especially at work,
yeah,
which is absolutely ludicrous because they're the people that you're surrounded by. And if they don't know how you feel, that knock-on effect can go into all different
yeah.
circumstances and situations, meetings, and things can fall apart and not work out. So I think it's important that people get okay with people not being okay at work.
Obviously, you mentioned obviously that people come up with a mirage of different reasons why they can't come in to work when oftentimes they're struggling with their mental health. What do you think of the way we're going in terms of the way we talk about mental health and the way those conversations we're having? Because there are some organisations that are actively promoting if you're
Mm.
struggling with your mental health to like say it and then go from there. But then there's still kind of this people don't know where they sit with it. Like,
Yeah.
because particularly with my generation and the ones for me as well, it's that whole thing of having a mental health day is like this new trendy topic that all like people might like, even
Mm.
my dad is a classic one for it. What the fuck's that? And I'm like, and I think it's really interesting because obviously, as someone, I grew up two self-employed parents where what was drilled into me was very much like the best cure for a common cold is self-employment. So basically, I had to be dead before I took a day off work or day off school. So that's been very much brought
Yeah.
into me. But I find it interesting now, obviously, having learned and grown a lot, I have a lot more understanding when it comes to
Mm.
mental health. But I think we still got so far to go to get rid of that stigma of like, having a mental health day is kind of this new trendy topic that
Mm.
everyone's talking about rather than it's a genuine thing and I'd much rather people take it than not.
Yeah, and I think if companies actually put the money in to provide these wellness experiences, the ones that I maybe go and do, and other people that I know in other industries go in and do, the mental health awareness becomes just a normal part of the culture because they talk about it. They've all experienced it. And I think one of the reasons I trained to be a mental health first aider is because the government are saying I think it's by 2030, it's going to be compulsory for them to have a mental health first aider as well as like a norm, you have your regular first
Yeah.
aider someone's always nominated. So this is the trajectory that they're aiming for. And every company will have to have a nominated mental health first aider that has to be trained in mental health. So then you've got that nominated person to go to. Because I think the other thing that's the problem is they say, "I'll go to HR." Now, I don't know about you, but HR are not always the easiest people to deal with.
No, and they're normally very corporate. It's normally a
And
very much,
yeah,
yeah,
and they kind of do things very tick box and it's very kind of clinical, and it's not saying every HR person, because
no,
I've worked for as an assistant for a HR director, and I know that not everyone is like that, but I also know how much they have to deal with. So they don't
yes,
always have the capacity to deal with it. So it's like there's something major happening, and somebody saying, "I'm feeling a bit depressed," in their eyes is like, "Well, this company's going to fall apart if I don't fix that thing. So you're going to get 5 minutes." So you can understand why, unfortunately, that happens. It doesn't make it right. But I think this whole kind of trend of the mental health awareness, it is growing and it is getting bigger. And I think it's a case of those of us that are advocates of it keep talking about it at work and raising the awareness, and sending things around the office, little kind of stories you find in the news and stuff like, "Oh, look, read this." Just keep it circulating, keep it moving round so people don't feel embarrassed or wrong, and that it just becomes part of the culture. It
yeah,
is going that way. It just
yeah.
takes time.
I think it's right. I think also it's about having, for me, what I've seen. I mean, I've been a driver for in my work of it's having those people that have struggled with their mental health because they'll be able to spot it
Yeah.
far before
Yeah.
anyone else will. I've been on several occasions because I've been through it myself where I can see if a person's like they're right here, and if we don't do something, we've got a problem.
Yeah, yeah. And it's good that we can see that, that's working in, back in the days before, all of the electronics and all of the kind of Wi-Fi and all of the way that we live now, which is all mostly online and heads down, we healed in community.
Yeah.
We healed in community and everyone would be looking out for everybody else. And I think we need to really bring some of that back, where exactly what you're saying, you can spot when somebody's in that space and you can do what you can to be compassionate and helpful. So look, you need to, half the time people just need someone to talk to.
Yeah.
They just need to get it out. And that we live in such an isolated society where everything's here and we don't connect.
Yeah.
Most people don't even know who their neighbours are these days. That's
Yeah.
quite sad, you
Do you,
know?
do you know one thing I would caveat that with? And it's a really interesting one and obviously slightly off topic, but it kind
Mm.
of links in. Because one debate I often have on here and with friends is I'm a big advocate for you can still build meaningful relationships online. I bang the drum. I will sing that until the cows come home. Particularly because two of my very best friends I met through lockdown. They live on completely different either
Amazing.
ends of the country or completely different countries of themselves, but I am probably the closest with them than I am with any of my friends that are closer by. And I think that's the thing is oftentimes we forget, we think the digital world is the problem when actually it's more giving people the space to have those
Yes.
conversations. So like I always say to team members, like you need to have those random moments where you call someone and go, I don't need anything. I just don't
Yeah.
want to talk about work for the moment. So can we just talk about something else?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Just talking about anything and everything. I mean, it's again, and the talking is really good for the nervous system. When you talk, you're using your vocal cords, and that's all connected to the vagus nerve. So another thing that's really good for the vagus nerve is talking and
Yeah.
feeling safe. So this is a big one. People need to feel safe. If you don't feel safe with someone, you're never going to open up. You're never going to say what you need to say. You're never going to feel heard. You're never going to feel seen. So again, it's people like yourselves and me and other people that are genuinely care that can create those safe spaces for people that allow their nervous system to go, actually, this is a good space for me to be able to share. And it's what we call co-regulation.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if they're on a screen, it doesn't matter if they're in front of you. If there's someone that you feel safe with and you can co-regulate, that's amazing. That's one of the best things for your mental health.
And then coming back to some of the breathwork stuff that you do, what is one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to breathwork?
That it doesn't do anything. Oh, I mean, I've heard all the jokes. You teach breath work, you're teaching people to breathe. I've heard it all. Yes, that's right. I am, and I'm helping a lot of people. And I think people just think that's not going to do anything. Um, and they're wrong. They're so wrong. I mean, I've helped people heal through some real big emotional situations, and I've changed lives. This stuff is deep, deep work. As long as you're working with someone who knows what they're doing, this conscious connected breath work is releasing deep emotional wounds that you just can't get to through talking therapy. And talking therapy is what we call a top-down approach. All right. So the vagus nerve has an affect health and an affect health. So 20% goes down and 80% goes up. Now, when you go to talking therapy, you're working with what we call a top-down approach. You're working with that 20% of information, which is great because it's going to help you maintain. It's never going to be a bad thing, but it won't ever get to that nuts and bolts of what keeps causing this problem because it's
Yep.
unconscious, it's in the body. So when you start to work with conscious connected breath work, the therapy, it's known as therapy without talking, is you're then working with what we call a bottom up approach. You're working with that 80% of information that goes from the body to the brain. So if you imagine one lane of traffic going down, four lanes of traffic going up, what's going to be stronger? That
Yeah.
four lanes of traffic
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So if you start to work with your body, breath work, somatic breath work, so conscious connected breath work, is a body-based practice. It heals the body, which then effectively helps to heal the mind. So people that say, it's not going to do anything, I say, come and try it and then tell me it doesn't do anything.
I was going to ask what was your advice if what was your advice if someone was skeptical about breathwork?
I'd say, go and read my reviews on Google.
Not shameless plug. Love it. I love it. What about is there a myth that you want to debunk about? Obviously, we've spoken a lot about the skeptics that come with breathwork, but is there a myth that you've heard that you think, why are we still saying this? This isn't true.
Yeah. One of the big ones, real big ones, is almost contradictory of what I've just said about how it affects the body and the release and all of that stuff, release and trauma, is that unfortunately at the moment there's a lot of stuff on social media that's showing this breath work with people in really big cathartic releases, like shaking and crying. And I feel that's ethically wrong, that you shouldn't be showing that sort of stuff online because that's someone's personal process. But B, that doesn't mean it has to be like that. And they're creating this unrealistic expectation that you've got to be in this massive, ridiculous state to have these life-changing experiences, and that's not necessarily the true case. And I think anyone that sees that on social media, it doesn't necessarily mean that that is what's going to happen to you. It's not
Yeah.
not real. Yeah.
It's that classic thing of I see it all the time in the disability community of anything that's positive will never get the coverage that something negative will happen. So I imagine it's the same thing of because that's a big reaction.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
does well, and it's a horrible thing that we've got to this stage in life where that's what does well. But
Well,
I
it
can,
sells, doesn't it?
yeah,
Drama sells, and that's what they want. It's all a marketing ploy. I done a live Instagram live with a friend of mine that we've been in this industry a long time, and we done, the rise of trauma porn, and that's what's happening is people are getting these trauma releases through breath work and a few other modalities, and then that's what's being shown to you, and that's, it's not always like that. And it can scare people, put people off, and they think,
yeah,
well, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to go there. But it's a case of we work with something called pendulation and titration, where we take you to a certain point, people that are well trained and know what they're doing, and then they'll bring you back again. So, the thing with the nervous system is you need to go towards whatever it is, and then you come back to a place of safety. Then you go back towards it again, and you come back to a place of safety. So you never take someone into a session where they go full blown into that experience, because they'll just come out like that and they won't be
yeah,
able, it's dangerous.
yeah.
So I think that's the biggest one I want to debunk.
It's that building. I'd imagine it's like a building tolerance for it. It's that it's
Exactly.
that whole run before you can walk analogy, and
Yeah.
it feels ironic me being a guy in a wheelchair making that joke. But yeah, it's that whole thing of you can't do everything at once. You kind of go, but it's the same. Like I do speaking therapy, and it's the same thing of you can't just go straight in for the kill because it ain't gonna work. It's you got to gradually get there, and I think you're completely right. It's that, and then also you say about trauma and that like I can't remember, trauma porn. And I related that to you often see it in the disabled community. We end up playing disability top trumps of like my disability affects me in this way. This is why this is worse. And it's so
Yeah.
interesting that we're still doing it because I'm sitting there going, guys, we all have
We're all on the same
issues with
page.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I'm not trying to fight you about what you can do and what you can't do. And I'd imagine it's the
Yeah.
same thing of almost that whole thing of like people going down the route of like, oh, but I've had this trauma and this has happened and that meant
Yeah.
that I'm getting this experience. It's so interesting that this is everything's a competition.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. And also, I think the other thing about that is that one thing I work with people, because I run programs, I do 8 to 12 week programs with people that are trying to heal something specific that they know they've had trauma within their life. It can be anything from attachment styles, the way that they keep attracting the wrong partner, to things like anxiety. I mean, the amount of people with anxiety that come to me that have been to doctors, they've been on a medication, they've tried all these things. I just say, you're just not breathing right. We get them breathing correctly within 3 months, they're anxiety free. So there's so many different ways you can work with people. But the thing I say in whatever element I'm working with, be mindful of the story. The story is the thing that will keep the nervous system in that loop. So recognize when you're in that story of the pity party for one, or the kind of victim consciousness where it's like, oh, woe is me. And this happened to me when I was 4 and I'm now like this because of X, Y, Z. That's then. You can identify with that and never move on, or you can go, okay, well, that's happened, but I'm in the present moment now and I don't want to be that person anymore. I choose to change.
With that in mind, though, what would you say? Just thinking when you sit there of the Simon Sinek thing of kind of sitting in the mud and allowing yourself to feel that problem or that issue that you're having or that thing you're struggling with. How do you balance that with clients? Because I do think there is power in if you're having a shitty day, allow yourself to have a shitty day.
Oh,
Like you're not.
absolutely.
It's what would you say on that in terms of obviously trying to keep yourself in that positive loop,
Mm.
but then also allowing yourself to go, yeah, this is a shitty situation, or I just feel like shite today.
Well, it's the word positivity for a start is something that we need to be mindful of in the healing community because, it's not all about being positive. The thing about healing is seeing and feeling and acknowledging how you're feeling and registering your emotions without trying to suppress or repress. That's where the danger happens. So it's not about trying to be positive and having a good day when it's a bad day. It's recognizing I'm having a bad day, but what story is playing out to try and convince me that this is the world's against me and that I'm a shit person and everything I do is wrong and I'm not good enough. Da, 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 da. The story is the thing we've got to watch.
Yep.
Feeling helpless and hopeless is okay. Just acknowledge that. Where do I feel it in my body? Is it in my chest? Is it in my tummy? Is it in my jaw or my shoulders? Like go towards it and understand what am I feeling? If people are angry, I always say to them, anger is a secondary emotion. There's something underneath the anger that needs to be acknowledged and seen. And sometimes you might not be able to do that by yourself. You might need the help of someone like me or another therapist that can help you unpack it a little bit. But it's about acknowledging how you feel and allowing yourself to feel like that without going into the spiral of you're a shit
Yeah,
person because you
yeah,
did X, Y, Z. Does that
yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So it's almost
Yeah,
that whole thing of just not letting yourself stay in it. You can kind
yeah,
of feel it, but then also understand why that's happening. And also, it is just kind of it's that thing I often get told of. You like you say, you're telling yourself this story, and
yeah,
then what you're doing as a classic overthinker, using me as an example, that then gets catastrophized,
yeah.
and you
That's
end up
it.
playing that game.
Yeah. And then you start breathing quicker and faster because you're getting anxious, and then all your nervous system's on board. And then before you know it, you're in full blown panic attack.
Yeah,
So this
yeah,
is how it plays out. But it's also recognizing when you're feeling these emotions, don't just sit there. So if something happens and you get stressed, like the cortisol moving through your body, it needs action. So whether you're just shaking out your arms, shrugging your shoulders, getting up and walking around a room, whatever it is that you're able to do it. Move the energy. Don't just sit there and let it fester because that's where it starts to build and that's where the
yeah,
breath will change, the nervous system will change. Work with the energy. I say to
yeah,
people, shaking is a really good thing to do. As soon as you start to feel anger, another one for anger is pushing your hands against a flat surface and really
yeah,
pushing that, getting the emotional charge out of the body helps to regulate the nervous system. So it's taking action and it's observing what's happening without getting caught in the story,
yeah.
which is not going to be something you can just do automatically. It's a practice. I just don't want people thinking, I can't do it. I must be really shit. I can't do it. You need to practice it. It's like anything. It was not just going to happen. You need to regulate, you need to breathe, you need to do all these little bits and pieces, all the little pieces of the puzzle, and then it starts to play out, things start to change.
It's that classic thing as well of like allow it. It's like my own little catchphrase. Allow people to make mistakes of like, yeah, you're not going to nail it every time, but who does? And and that's kind of a thing that I try and tell myself. Again, hypocritical over here. I try and tell myself this, but what advice I would give other people is very much
Yeah.
allow yourself to make the mistakes. Like, yeah, you're not going to get it right every single time. You're only human, and that's if you're trying something new, you're not going
And
to be
being
good at it.
human is all about feeling. Being human is all about feeling. That's why we decided to come here in the first place. Go to Earth, they said, be human. It'll be a laugh. And then we're here going, what's going on? But it is allowing it's the suppression and the repression that causes the problems. Like, I use the common one is if you split up with someone and you don't want anyone to know that it bothers you. So you put on a brave face, and this does seem to be more so with men than it is with women because women have normally more emotional circles to offload
Yeah, yeah.
and, say whatever they need to say. Men they kind of put the
Brush
big,
it
big
off.
brave face on. But
Yeah.
what they're doing in that moment is they're pushing all of that emotion down. So then you wonder why you're depressed. What are you doing when you're depressing all of that emotion? Where's it going to go?
Yeah.
It's not going to just disappear. It's in the
Yeah, yeah.
body. So it's learning to work with things and allowing them to come up and be seen, felt, and heard and acknowledged that allows them to move through you. And that's
Really
where you
interesting
heal.
point about the whole men thing. Because I found that really interesting because it is such a behavior that we have of just, we don't yeah, we don't talk about it. We just keep it. And then I think as well, it's that whole thing of we don't really know what to do with it. There is a big movement towards men talking about it more, and I am enjoying seeing that happen. But it is so interesting you say about them holding it in. Have you seen an increase in the amount of clients coming to you that are men?
Yeah, there's a lot more men that do breath work now because it is therapy without talking and they don't want to talk about it, but they can release it
Valid
through
point.
the breath
Yeah, I
work.
didn't even think about that.
Yeah. And I've got quite a few men now training with me as well, which is great.
That's interesting as well, because I'd imagine as well there's certain men that are like, I want to be trained by a man because of yeah our own
There's all
unconscious
different ways.
bias. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. I say just when you mentioned about the men thing, I was like, that's actually really true. Especially the whole not wanting to talk about. I've never even thought about that connection. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
no wonder they want to do it more.
Yeah, and it's great that they're doing it, because it can be seen as a little bit of a spiritual practice. It has got a spiritual connotation to it. I am a shaman, so I work shamanically. I've got all my rattles and all the music is quite shamanic, but it brings the energy that what we need to help this stuff move through you. But because it's also so much about the nervous system and so much about neuroscience, the guys love that. They soak
Yeah,
that stuff up, they want to know it. So it's that fine line. A lot of them come with their partners and go, well, I'm not doing yoga, but I'll do a bit of breath work. Or
yeah.
I'm not going to a sound bath, but I'll do a bit of breath work because they feel like it's almost acceptable. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
yeah, I
just
know exactly what you
hilarious.
mean. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But talking about that, just why I think of it, I've got a great guy if you want somebody to talk to about this kind of men's health stuff that I can give you, and I'm sure he would love
Yeah.
to be interviewed.
Yeah, definitely. I'm all on board on that because I was going to say, what advice would you give to someone who wants to start out with breathwork if they're thinking about it or they've not really heard of it and obviously listening today? Is there anything you can say to someone who's like, oh, I think this might work for me, or I just want to try it and see what happens?
Yep, I'd say go to my website first and foremost,
Which I
and you
link
can,
below.
yeah, perfect, Intuitive Breathwork UK, and have a little look through and see if there's anything, especially if you're in the London or the Kent area. But the other thing you can do is also go to the UK Breath Association. That is a new governing body that has just come in because there was no governing body for breathwork, and it was getting a little bit crazy out there with everybody thinking they can just do it because it's just a bit of breathing. Go there and find one in your local area. Just email them, ask some questions. Some of them do some online sessions. I'd say go in person if you can, but if you struggle with anxiety and social issues, then, there's people that will work with you in a myriad of different ways. But find someone in your area and connect with them, talk to them, have a look at their website, find out where they were trained, because you should know where they were trained. They should normally we have particular badges that say we're ethically certified breath workers by the Global Breathwork Alliance, which is the global governing body. But then you've also got the UK Breath Association. That's quite new. So the global one is also quite good. But I would say just go out and have a little look around, but make sure that they're trained properly. That's all I would say. And just play with it.
Love it. And then lastly, I'm going to ask you the question that I ask every guest at the end of every episode, which is what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree with?
I mean, I could go. I think I,
Slightly worried.
I'm, yeah, I'm thinking, well, how deep shall I go with this one? I'll tell you what, I'm going to go with an easy one. Um,
Ah,
all right, I'll go in with the hard one. I'm kind of a bit pissed off about Brexit. I'm
fair
not going to
enough.
lie.
Yeah,
I'm not going to lie about
yeah,
that. It's like nothing's happened. And the reason I'm upset about it is my son is dating someone from Copenhagen, and for them to live together is like the most ridiculous scenario for them to
yeah,
try. It's just so, and it makes my
yep,
blood boil that we've made this decision and nothing's fucking happening.
yeah. No, I'm with
What
you. Yeah, I'm
the
with you.
fuck is going on?
Yeah, I'm with you, and obviously with everything going as we recall this, all the Trump things kicking off as well. It's crazy. I mean, I know myself. I've got friends that are in Frankfurt, and they considered moving to London,
Oh,
and the paperwork that's involved. It's that classic thing. I sound like my dad, but like y- you hear about all these people coming over on the dinghies and everything else, but it's more complicated to do it through the proper
do
paperwork
it the proper
channels,
way.
and it's
Yeah.
like. How does that even work? I mean,
And
I'm not
it's,
going to open that debate, but I
no,
just do find the whole process so strange. I mean,
it's, yeah.
I always joke and say, because I've got Irish in me, I'm quite lucky that I can still sort of connect to Europe. But then, as you say, my partner isn't. So then I'm like, I can get away with it, but you can't.
I think the reason it makes me cross is it's really affecting young people's ability to go out and explore the world. Like
Yes.
I could do that when I was young. My son's 25, and you know, at his age, I was off working in wherever, enjoying life in Spain, Ibiza, doing. He can't do that
Yeah.
without it being a massive chore. And I think that's very close to my heart because now he's having to go to work in Canada for 18 months because that's the only place that they can go together. And I'm not happy about that because he's too far away.
Yeah, it's
I
mad.
mean,
I mean,
I am
we
happy
we've
for him.
spoken. Me and my partner, we've considered moving to Spain, but it's been sort of that was
Mm,
the conversation. But even then, like now, you sit there and think we've got so much more red tape that we'd have to get through.
yeah.
And then there's this connotation as well that I often hear of, oh, but they want to do it for us, so then they're going to let us. And I'm like, that's a great idea and completely
Mm.
see where you're coming from, but I don't think that's the real world. I don't think that's what's really happening.
So, I think I feel sorry for the younger generation not having that freedom to be able to just pack a bag and go, right, I'm going to go backpacking around Europe.
Yeah.
That should be a rite of passage.
Yeah, I completely agree. But I think there's another issue there as well, where we are now. Obviously, it's very much because I'm 26. It's very much in that those two camps of you're either one of the ones that goes traveling, or you're one of the
Yeah.
ones that's like severely dedicated to your career, and you.
Yeah.
There's not really that happy medium because there's this whole thing of with the job market at the moment, it's very tricky. So then there's that, oh, but if I go traveling, how long is it going to take me to get a job when I get back? So
Mm.
it creates this
All the
whole
fear,
environment
all
where
the
people,
fear.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. But then I'd
Mm.
say that links into what you do. Of that's probably why a lot more young people are struggling with stress because they're like,
Yeah.
what the fuck do we do?
Yeah. And that's exactly what they're doing. That's how my son feels about it. He went through a stage of depression probably about 3 or 4 years ago, not long well, we were coming out of COVID. It was, it was stressful because he just said whatever we try and do, it's like we're being blocked. It's that their freedom is so limited. So, it's even more important that people understand that it doesn't have to be like that way internally. That, when you come up against these situations that are trying to contain you and make you feel small and put you into fear and telling you that you can't do this and you can't do that, you can do all of those things once you get what is going on inside into a space that gives you the confidence and the safety to go, I can step out of my comfort zone and I will be okay.
It's that classic thing I always relate to because it's what I've been in a lot recently is that whole having the brain space for it. Because a lot of us are
Yeah,
just so overwhelmed that we can't even think straight because we've got this going
yep,
on.
yep.
And then you just go, can someone just turn it off for a minute just while I figure out what the fuck I'm doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But thank you so much for coming on, Susie. It's been a great conversation. I've learned so much as well. So thank you
Good.
so much for coming on. Obviously, as always, guys, we'll link all of Susie's details below. If you
Mhm.
want to check her out or get in contact with her, I'll link everything below for you. But yeah, thank
Perfect.
you so much for coming on.
And I would like to offer your listeners and the people that if they do want to come and see me for a one-to-one, then I will give them a £40 discount.
Amazing.
All
Amazing.
right? Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you
That's in
so
person,
much.
not online.
Thank you so much.